On December 25, 2024, while the world celebrated Christmas, a commercial plane with 67 people on board did what should be just another routine flight. But without anyone might imagine, this flight was about to enter history as another dark chapter of the invisible war that unfolds in heaven. Flight 8243 of Azerbaijan Airlines, operated by a Brazilian E190, had taken off from the capital of Azerbaijan, Baku, bound for Grozny, in the Chechnya region. On board, ordinary passengers, families, workers, and the crew followed their journey, oblivious to what was about to happen. As the aircraft performed its final approach to the landing in Grozny, a terror scene began to unfold. Reports of survivors point out that suddenly a strong explosion shook the fuselage of the plane. Srashises hit the cabin, and the aircraft began to lose altitude quickly. Panic took over. Drills, shouts, despair. In the cabin, pilots kept contact with the control tower, desperate for authorization for an emergency landing. But, crashing further to everyone, the Russian authorities simply denied the request. The order was clear. The plane could not land on Russian soil. Without an option, the crew was forced to deflect its route and try to reach the nearest airport in Kazakhstan, almost 400 kilometers away. With the aircraft severely damaged, the mission seemed impossible. Even so, the pilots did their best to save everyone on board. The struggle for survival lasted just over an hour. But as they approached the city of Aktau, Kazakhstan, the plane could not resist. He fell very close to the landing track, killing 38 people, including the 2 pilots and a flight attendant. Only 29 managed to survive the impact. The first news rated what happened as an air crash. Kremlin even claimed that the tragedy was caused by a possible shock with birds, an explanation that soon began to crumble. On the same day, photos, videos, and reports of survivors began to circulate on social networks and international news, revealing a much more disturbing truth. The aircraft had been hit by a missile. Visible damage was consistent with an external explosion, and the fragments found in the fuselages left no doubt. In a few days, international pressure increased. Why was a commercial plane attacked? Who gave the order? The answer, as it would come out soon after, would be even more impactful. In early July, Azerbaijan's Minvalu newspaper published a leaked letter that revealed the name of those who would have authorized the shooting. Captain Dmitry Palatichuk, Russian Air Defense Forces officer. According to the document, he was on duty near Grozny at the time of the incident. That day, at 5:40 a.m., his unit entered the maximum readiness due to an attack on Ukrainian drones attack. 2 hours later, at 8:11 a.m., an unidentified target was detected on the radar. However, the dense fog prevented visual confirmation. Despite the uncertainty, Palatichuk received a direct order from the Air Regional Command by telephone to slaughter the target immediately. 2 missiles were fired. The first failed, but the second exploded close enough to seriously damage the Embraer E190, causing chaos on board. In addition to the letter, the newspaper also released internal voice recordings that confirmed every detail of the incident. In the messages, it was possible to clearly hear the shooting orders, the confirmation of error in the first shot, and the permission for the second launch, which eventually hit the civil plane. These revelations shocked the world. But what was to come was still more alarming. After the letter and the audios, Russia could no longer contain the pressure. The independent newspaper Russian The Insider, one of the few research vehicles still active in the country, obtained a telephone recording where Captain Dmitry Palatichuk himself confirms that he writes the letter after the attack. According to him, the order to write the document came directly from superiors in a clear attempt to control damage. 3 days after the disaster, Vladimir Putin broke the silence. In a cold and calculated pronouncement, he classified the event as a tragic incident, assigning the fault to an alleged external interference in Russian airspace. However, at no time did the Russian president acknowledge that the aircraft had been slaughtered by his strength. The president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, spared no words. He directly accused Moscow of overthrowing the plane and filed 3 public requirements: a formal apology from Russia to the Azeri people, official recognition of guilt for the slaughter, punishment to those responsible, in addition to the payment of compensation to the victims and the airline. The Russian answer was predictably evasive. Putin made a generic apology, but refused to recognize any formal fault, nor punish the military involved or authorized any payment of indemnities. Meanwhile, other sordid details emerged. Defense experts identified that the missile used in the attack was from a Panzer S-1 system, one of the most advanced Russian anti-aircraft defense platforms, projected precisely to differentiate with high-accuracy military targets. Panzer S-1 radar has the ability to identify various target data, such as speed, altitude, dimensions, route, which means, without margin for doubt, that the Russian operators knew the target was not a drone. To get an idea, the Embraer E190 is 36 meters long and 28 meters of wingspan, flying hundreds of km/h. Typical Ukrainian drones have less than 10 meters of wingspan and speed less than 150 kilometers per hour. The differences were glaring. Even so, the firing order was maintained. And even after the attack, the Russian authorities did not allow the emergency landing, condemning the aircraft to a desperate flight of almost 400 kilometers over the Caspian Sea. Narrator, more emotional tone, with increasing trail in the background. Telemetry images of the accident show the heroic effort of the pilots, who fought the impossible to keep the aircraft in the air and try to save lives. With the damaged communication system and the engine, the crew kept control for about 90 minutes. Even with all the skill, the damage was too severe. Shortly before arriving at Aktau Airport, Embraer E190 lost altitude and fell during the attempted landing. The pilots and a flight attendant died of the impact, but 29 passengers survived, thanks to the structural resistance of the plane and the crew heroism. Palatichuk's letter brought another disturbing point. The Russian communication system that day was collapsing. Cut cables and weak cellular signal forced the military to coordinate their actions via unstable means, dramatically raising the risk of error. But even with these problems, the Panzer S-1 radar provided clear and detailed, sufficient data to prevent the shooting. It wasn't just a judgment error. It was reckless. It was unprepared. And above all, it was a decision that could have been avoided. The impact of the accident was not restricted to the military field. The relations between Russia and Azerbaijan collapsed. At the end of June, the tension reached a new level when 2 Azeri citizens were killed by Russian police in the city of Ekaterinburg under suspicion of torture. Baku's answer was immediate. Azerbaijan police carried out an operation against Sputnik's local office, Russian news agency, holding 7 employees on charges of fraud and money laundering. The next day, 8 more Russian citizens were arrested in Azerbaijan for involvement with cybercrimes and drug trafficking. In retaliation, Moscow arrested businessman Yusuf Kalilov, an important figure of the Azeri diaspora in Russia, and performed a series of migratory beats in Voronezh, holding over 300 people. The climb was brutal, and with each prison, the diplomatic abyss between the 2 countries deepened. And all this because of a missile fired at a civil plane. The case of Flight 8243 was not an isolated accident. He exposed an uncomfortable truth. Russia's military structures operate under a logic of opacity, disorganization, and recklessness, with fatal consequences. More than a punctual mistake, the slaughter of this civil aircraft revealed deep systemic failures within the Russian armed forces. International military experts were categorical. The overthrow of Flight 8243 could never have occurred with a system such as Panzer S-1 unless there was total negligence or a conscious order to shoot, regardless of the target. The Panzer S-1 system is not a low-cost equipment or obsolete technology. He is one of the main showcases of the Russian war industry, capable of operating with high-precision radar, ability to easily distinguish drones, helicopters, and commercial aircraft, simultaneous detection of multiple targets. Radar data would easily allow you to realize that the target was a large civil jet, flying on a regular commercial route. Therefore, the episode raises an inevitable question. Why, then, the firing order has been maintained? There is, behind the scenes of geopolitics, theories that go beyond human error. Some analysts suggest that increasing tension in the Caucasus region directly influenced this hasty decision. That same month, Russia had suffered a series of attacks on Ukrainian drones against military bases and refineries in the south of the country, generating a panic climate in several military centers. Internal reports show that, in the hours preceding the attack on Flight 8243, the Russian command had already placed dozens of anti-aircraft units on a full alert. Under this state of paranoia and deficient communication, decisions were made blind. Narrator, severe voice, paused, as if alerting the public. Flight 8243 paid the price of this disorganization. But the most alarming thing is that this was not the first case. In July 2014, a very similar event shocked the world. Malaysia Airlines Flight MH17 with almost 300 people on board was shot down by a missile fired by pro-Russian separatist forces in eastern Ukraine. At the time, international investigations pointed out that the system used was a Russian Buk missile, provided by the Moscow military themselves. The pattern is clear. The tragedies are not merely accidents. They are part of a cycle of recklessness and opacity, always followed by attempts to cover up, misinformation and manipulation of the narrative. But the case of Flight 8243 carries an even more dangerous ingredient. It occurred in full expansion of tensions between Russia and Azerbaijan, two nations that, despite intense economic relations, see themselves on opposite sides of various regional conflicts. After the accident, the narrative war began. On the one hand, Kremlin trying to minimize tragedy as a mere unfortunate incident. On the other, the Azerbaijan government demanding punishments and threatening to break bilateral agreements. Popular protests in Azerbaijan grew rapidly, with demonstrations asking for direct retaliation against Russia. Azeris newspapers began to publish new complaints about the case daily, while social networks flooded campaigns asking for justice to the victims of Flight 8243. The families of the dead, both in Azerbaijan and other countries, cry out for answers. Widows, orphans, and mourned parents question, why were our loved ones victims of such a brutal crime? Why does Russia still act with such impunity? How long will the world tolerate this kind of behavior? Meanwhile, diplomats around the world accompany the crisis unfolding with great concern. Experts warn that the episode can mark the beginning of a new cycle of instability in the Caucasus, with possible impacts even on the military balance on the Ukraine border. The Flight 8243 of Azerbaijan Airlines is not just a number amid air accident statistics. He is the symbol of a much larger problem: the unbridled militarization, the dehumanization of civilians in war zones, the ethical bankruptcy of the armed forces that act without responsibility. And as long as there are no punishments, while families have no justice, while the truth is suffocated by state lies, this story will be far from over.